Welcome to this screencast. This is Mrs. Majkut from the Albany High School Library. I've got my top 10 titles queued up for you just in time for summer reading. Let's get started. First, we have The Voting Booth by Brandi Colbert. This is a realistic fiction title with a little bit of drama and romance. This book was released in the fall of 2020, just in time for Election Day. Marva is a high school student who's heavily involved in getting people registered to vote. On Election Day, early in the morning, she meets another high school student, Duke Crenshaw, who is turned away from being able to vote. Marva makes it her personal mission to get Duke to the right polling place. They jump in Marva's car and the adventure ensues. They both rush from polling place to polling place, looking for the correct voting precinct for Duke to cast his vote. Duke and Marva start to realize they might have more in common than they first thought. There is enough dramatic tension and romantic interest to keep readers interested. Can one vote change the world? Definitely. The Voting Booth by Brandi Colbert. This is also a very timely topic because, as we're seeing in the news, voter suppression is alive and well in Georgia. It's an excellent book. Next, we have Almost American Girl by Robin Ha. Robin is a teenager living in Seoul, Korea in the 1990s. She's lived there for all of her childhood with her single mother. They unexpectedly take a vacation to the United States during the school year that sends Robin reeling. Without warning, Robin's quote-unquote vacation becomes permanent as her mother has decided to get married rather suddenly. However, Robin realizes her mother planned this all along and did not want to upset Robin. Robin doesn't speak English and is very hot in Huntsville, Alabama in the Deep South. She has no way of communicating with her friends in Korea because this was before the internet. She didn't even get to say goodbye. This graphic novel depicts a painful journey to America as an Asian immigrant. Robin is suffering from homesickness and culture shock, and the language barrier makes it nearly impossible to make friends. She spends a lot of time drawing and sketching to escape the loneliness and isolation until her mom enrolls her in a comics drawing class that helps turn things around. Who knew that you could learn English really well by reading comic books and graphic novels? Don't miss this title. You will root for Robin too. Almost American Girl by Robin Ha. Next, we have Fights, One Boy's Triumph Over Violence by Joel Christian Gill. You might remember this African-American author because we have several other books in the library by this author. He has written the Strange Fruit graphic nonfiction series. In this personal story, Joel features himself as a young kid who feels pressured and encouraged to always fight to solve any problems. When should you fight? Does it have to get physical? Can you ever back down? Does fighting actually solve problems? Can any problems be solved without fighting? Joel asks these questions of himself and others in a tough city setting. His revelations are profound. He has a lot to say about the culture and prevalence of violence in our schools and communities. Can we all do better? Joel Christian Gill thinks we can. Fights by Joel Christian Gill. Next up, we have Blood and Germs by Gail Gero. This is a fantastic nonfiction title about all of the medical procedures, diseases, and wounds during the Civil War. This title was exquisitely researched by this author, and there are many primary source interviews, actual Civil War photos, and testimonies from the veterans, doctors, and others straight from the battlefield. The 1860s was not an ideal time to need an amputation. This was long before sanitary conditions in hospitals with hand washing or even sterilized instruments. We learn of horse-drawn medical teams transporting injured soldiers, over rough roads to field hospitals for immediate care. We learned that most stomach wounds were fatal, and those soldiers died of infection. We learn of the dangers of dysentery, diarrhea, and gangrene. This is the perfect title for those interested in medicine, the conflicts of war, United States history, and more. Blood and Germs by Gail, Gero. Please note that this author has 2 other nonfiction titles in the Deadly Diseases trilogy. One is Red Madness, and the other is the Bubonic Plague. Next, we have Call Me American by Abdi, Noor, Iftin. This is another memoir by a young Somalian Muslim immigrant named Abdi. Abdi grew up in war-torn Somalia in the city of Mogadishu. If you recall the book or the movie Black Hawk Down, that took place in Mogadishu in 1993. Somalia has not had a functioning government, school system, hospital system, or basic services of a city or state in his lifetime. Warring tribes and clans dominate the landscape, and it's incredibly unsafe. Police corruption is the norm, and bribes are required. Abdi did have to spend a significant amount of time avoiding gangs and being forced to join a gang. The hope of a conflict-free future for Somalians looked bleak in Abdi's time there in Mogadishu. He taught himself English from watching American movies, and his friends call him Abdi the American because he's so good at speaking English. He even starts teaching English to other Somalians. After a chance meeting with a journalist and a decade of waiting and applying for visas and also paying the required police bribes, Abdi's finally allowed to enter the United States, and he's assigned to live with a host family in the state of Maine. He does experience some culture shock, but does begin to assimilate. One fact that I found fascinating about this book was that when Abdi arrived in the United States, he was very worried about whether or not there would be a dog living in the host family house that he was assigned to. Apparently, Somalians do not keep or live with dogs in their houses at all. He was confused about why Americans keep dogs and pets, and he said that dogs are considered unclean. I found that absolutely fascinating. Find out what happened to Abdi here in the States. Read Call Me American by Abdi Noor Iftin. Next, we have A Faux Love Story by Lone Lee. This is a realistic fiction title, a cute, light romance book. The 2 main characters are Bao Nguyen and Lin Mai. There are 2 families, the Nguyen's and the Mai's, run competing Vietnamese-American restaurants right on the same street. Bao and Lin have successfully avoided each other for years, even when they were little kids. Their parents strategically kept them away from each other. Otherwise, their fierce restaurant competition would be revealed. However, they also have a chance encounter that allows them to reconnect, and romantic sparks fly. Can they work around their feuding families? Is it even a possibility? You'll also get hungry reading this because they feature many of the Vietnamese recipes throughout the story. You'll absolutely get a hankering for a bowl of pho. A Faux Love Story by Lone Lee. Next up, we have Kent State by Dirk Backdurf and Kent State by Deborah Wiles. Don't adjust your screen. You are seeing 2 books with the same title called Kent State. The one on the left is a graphic nonfiction title, and the one on the right is a verse novel. And I'll explain the difference between the 2. You may remember that Dirk Backdurf is an author that we have in the library. He wrote the Jeffrey Dahmer serial killer graphic novel called My Friend Dahmer. When Backdurf was a kid in 1970, the National Guard rolled into his small town in Ohio to quell college students protesting the Vietnam War at the local university. If you didn't know, the Ohio National Guard gunned down unarmed college students on this campus during a nonviolent protest. 4 students were killed and 9 were shot and wounded. It is interesting to note that some of the same questionable police tactics used in today's protests were also used then. For example, police officers covered their name and badge numbers with black tape during the shooting on these students. And they did that to avoid recognition. The author researched this topic extensively using the archives at Kent State, among others. He asked the question, what is the price of dissent? Just in time for the 50th anniversary of that dark day. The second Kent State title on the right is a verse novel by Deborah Wiles. This uses dialogue and it features many different alternating characters. I would say that these two titles go together almost as a paired text companion to one another. Wiles writes in verse, and she features rich dialogue back and forth between angry college students, angry Ohio National Guardsmen, and members of law enforcement. We even hear from local politicians who can't believe this is happening in their town and want it to go away. You can hear echoes of President Nixon's law and order slogan throughout the book. The author focuses on the 4 college students that were gunned down. We learn all about Allison, Bill, Sandy, and Jeff and their tragic demise on May 4th, 1970. If you want to understand the history of protest in our young country, both of these titles are essential. Kent State by Dirk Backdurf and Deborah Wiles. Next, we have The Awakening of Malcolm X by Tiffany D. Jackson and Ilyasa Shabazz. This is a powerful, intimate look at Malcolm X's young adult years in prison as an adolescent from 1946 to 1952. It's technically a prequel to the autobiography of Malcolm X that he wrote himself. It was written and conceived by his daughter, Ilyasa, and Tiffany D. Jackson, who is an author that we will also speak about in a moment. The book opens with Malcolm in a courtroom being found guilty of burglarizing houses in Boston with his white girlfriend on the stand, who flips on him in open court. We learn of this nervous entry into the famous Charlestown prison. The story shifts back and forth to earlier times with his family in Michigan. We also learn that his family home was burned down by a local chapter of the KKK and how his father died suspiciously shortly thereafter in a streetcar accident. Sadly, we also learn about his mother's institutionalization for a mental breakdown that she had and how all of the children in the little family end up going to various foster care homes. We learned how he became a voracious reader in prison, how he discovered Islam, and became invested in learning more about civil rights, education, Black power, and prison reform. This book is an in-depth look at his teen years in a way that makes Malcolm X more accessible to young adults today. And last but not least, we have Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. You might recognize this author. She has multiple titles in our library. She also did Monday's Not Coming, and the other title was Allegedly. So she has some great options in the library if this book is checked out. However, we do have multiple copies. So here we go, Grown. When you were a teen, did you ever date someone older than you? Did your parents know about it? How old is too old? How do you know when someone is too old for you? Says who? What if you think you're grown and no one else understands him like you do? What is the age of consent? Are you grown? Tiffany D. Jackson's riff on the Me Too movement profiles a story of exploitation and vulnerability of a young Black girl, a talented singer, specifically 17-year-old Enchantress Jones. Some of the storyline mirrors the rise and fall of R. Kelly, but this book is entirely fictionalized. Music mogul Corey Fields discovers Enchantress at a music audition and convinces her parents that he's going to launch her music career. Or is he? Is she grown? Should her parents have known better? Can famous and rich perpetrators of violence and abuse ever be held accountable? This is an edge of your seat thriller. It's very fast paced of what is going to happen next. That's Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. So let's recap our top 10. Here is a list. Please stop by the library, see Mrs. Abdul or myself. We're happy to help you find a book for summer reading or for any other reason. And again, every author on here does have more than one title, so take a look. Thanks for watching this screencast, and stay tuned for more screencasts from the Albany High Library.